Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about Moondrop Chu. So before we begin, I do want to quickly thank the Yaoyaotiger HIFI Audio Store on AliExpress for sending this one out to me super quick, and sending out some Moondrop swag, some merch. You don't see this too often. I'm not sure if I've seen this one yet, but it's pretty cool. It's obviously a little piece of bamboo with the Moondrop and Chu logo on it. So very cool, and very much thanks to those guys for doing that. And if you're on AliExpress, do check them out. So here is the box. Kind of familiar. If you've seen 10 or 20 of these reviews so far, you know what this all looks like. There's the graph on the back. And what does it look like up close? So you know, half the thing about the Chu is, one, the shells are this metal alloy, and they feel super great in the hand. There's actually a nice weight to them. They're built super solid. But, you know, attached to the shells are these $13 tips. So you're essentially paying $20, and about $13 of that are these Moondrop spring tips, which I was interested in anyway. So I sort of jumped at the chance to get Chu, mainly to get the tips, but it actually turned out to be a pretty awesome set. So this is the cable, the dreaded cable that everyone seems to be complaining about. It looks okay. It tangles if you look at it. It's got this slightly sticky rubbery coating to it, so not my favorite. And of course it is non-detachable, so that's a bit of a problem, but you know, can't really do anything about it. And the coating itself, it's a little less microphonic, but it tends to tangle if you look at it, so can't do too much about that. So let's dive into it super quick. And there's a ton of reviews on this set, so we're actually going to run through this one quite easily. And I'll start off by saying it's probably going to be the easiest review ever, at least for this year. Simply because, as I said, the price is about $20. It's a very well-known tuning, and we'll take a look at that in a second. But you know, this is pretty much, you know, standard Moondrop tuning, dead on, implemented quite well, executed well, and so known tuning, executed well, and that's about everything you need to know to spend your $20 on this one. Yeah, it's a pretty easy recommendation at $20. But the big but, and probably the most important thing on this whole sheet, is just because everyone says that's great, and I'll say it's, you know, it's great for the price, it may not be great for you or anyone, and that's just because of the tuning. It's a well-known Moondrop tuning, but if that tuning isn't appealing to you, then Moondrop Chu is not going to be appealing to you either. So I'll call it a slight bass-boosted neutral. It's kind of a natural sound, but if you look at it in comparison to other sets, and let's say we look at it compared to BL03, so Chu has this really kind of light, lowered bass level. BL03 sold millions of it. People tend to like more bass, and even more mid bass, because that's kind of a really I don't know if it's emotional, but you know, especially those lower guitars, mid bass, drums, vocals. All that stuff sounds super natural and engaging on BL03. Moondrop Chu, definitely a lighter version of that. And treble-wise, BL03 has sort of a lesser fatiguing, and some people will say not as detailed treble. But again, this is a tuning that's worked for millions of people, so I would just point out again that you really have to consider what Chu does here versus what your favorite set might do, and BL03 is one example. So here's another example. People, especially in this $20 range, tend to like KZ's big V-shaped tuning. So big bass boost. Again, look at Chu is all the way down here. KZ tends to be a good, you know, 5 decibels above that, above Harman. Mids, kind of more recessed on KZ because it's a big V. Chu does that quite well. And then you see, you know, this peakiness that happens with KZ, and that's big, you know, treble peaks, high energy, a little shouty, a little, you know, a little thin, but they tend to be very engaging, very high energy. It tends to work very well for popular music, and that's why people like that signature. Chu is, you know, definitely more reserved and not nearly as peaky, quite smooth. So again, if you're kind of driven, if your music library tends to be a little more high energy, a little more bass driven, then Chu may not be for you. So as I said, just because everyone says it's great, do really consider what your own preferences are before you dive in and spend your $20. So as I said, the tips alone, $13. Cable is okay, it's rubbery, tangles quite easily, but a little slightly microphonics. And as I said, the shells are pretty awesome. They're, I think whatever alloy they used, there's just a very high build quality, and the weight to them is super nice for $20. So absolutely no complaints there on the build quality or the shells. So do deep fit these. As I said, these spring tips and shells kind of small. The spring tips tend to let you push them into your ear quite deep, and I would suggest doing that because you'll actually get more of a bass response. And like I said, this one is a little light on bass, so you surely don't want to be losing any bass there. So do make sure these things fit properly and push them in about as far as they will go. I'll also say power it properly because with a little less power, and we'll talk about that a little later, the stage tends to get quite small. So do give it an amp if you got one. So the sound, like I said, it is a well-executed Moondrop tuning, and there's not really any compromises here. The driver quality is Moondrop quality. There's no peaks. The resolution is fine for the price. The stage is fine. There really just aren't any major faults here, and I think that's what the gist of most of reviews are going to be, and I think pretty much have been so far as well. It's just very hard to find any faults with what they did. It's just a well-executed $20 set that you don't really find all that often. And I will say it is slightly sharp. It's slightly unforgiving on some recordings. May not be your favorite signature, but it's really hard to argue there's anything wrong with it. Moondrop is really pretty much an expert at this tuning. So the bass, like I said, the bass, so let's look at this real quick. So the bass, on the lighter side of probably $20 budget sets, I definitely put micro pour on top of the vent on the shell, and that gives you about 1 to 2 decibels more, especially in the sub-bass area. I think that kind of works out quite well, but in general, you do have to wrap your head around this bass level. It's slightly below Harman. It's probably slightly below general population preferences. That tends to be what Moondrop focuses on. So, I will say the quality is definitely there, but you really do have to personally look at the level and decide if that's going to work with your preferences and your library. It's on the light side, but definitely not like 10 Gems Ola, although it was way, way under. And the bass here is actually very complementary to the mids. It adds some musicality, but what I would say is the level, the impact, and the sub bass is a bit limiting for bass heavy genres, or those who prefer a bit more fun sounding bass, like a KZ style bass. And micro pour over the vent will give you about 1 to 2 decibels more. So yeah, I think the bass is sort of one of those defining characteristics of whether you want to spend your $20 or not. I think it's fine, but if you're definitely into more V-shaped sets, the bass is going to be on the sort of lower, weaker side of what you're used to, and do take that into consideration. So the mids, no real surprise here. The mids are the star and executed well, as you expect to be, and as the graph indicates. I mean, it's just kind of smooth, nice, detailed. The bass doesn't really cloud the mids at all, so a ton of clarity, nice transparency, nice detail. Everything kind of works in its favor, and a lot of that is just because this tuning has been used for more than a few years. So the bass, even though it is at a lower level, it is a nice contrast to these slightly sharp, edgy, clean mids. It gives you lots of separation, clarity, and detail. And as soon as you put them on, you sort of hear this Moondrop sound. And I think that's a lot of it, is this contrast, this slightly sharp sound with a lower bass that kind of sits below. It's just a very nice complement. The two work together quite well. So yeah, I kind of dig it. It's just very hard to nitpick the technicalities at $20. I mean, you can poke at the resolution and say, well, it's not the highest resolution I've heard. But, I mean, again, it's $20 and it's well executed. there's just not a major fault. So I find it hard to really nitpick those. And really, to hear anything out of place, you really need to push the volume quite hard, and I would suggest not doing that simply because of the treble area. So all this is good. This at higher volumes is probably going to be slightly sharp and slightly fatiguing because there's no real dip there. But so I would suggest not pounding on your volume dial too much for that reason. So the treble, very nice extension, but like I said, I got ahead of myself. So do really pay attention to this whole area because it doesn't really dip as much as other sets are. And especially if you're used to this, 3K rise and then a dip, kind of where your snare drums, maybe your electric guitars, EDM, synth, higher synth sounds, all tend to hit in that 3 to 5 range. And if you don't dip that at all, it tends to be a little sharper, a little more noticeable. So, do take that into consideration. Definitely at a lower volume, it's not really all that an issue, but if you turn it up, you'll definitely hear it. As I said, some people will prefer a dip, so it'll be a little less fatiguing, and that really depends on your library. But again, you're just looking at 1 dD coherency, no peaks. There's just really nothing out of place on the treble either. Again, you can try to nitpick it, but there's just nothing really wrong with it. Just make sure you get the fit right so the treble and the bass are balanced with each other. Otherwise, it's going to sound a bit too thin or bright, I guess is what I would say. So stage. Technicals are unexpectedly good, and I will say that just because I think Ola is probably the closest set I've listened to recently that's about as close to this, and that was sort of unexpectedly bad, and I think this one set my expectations lower. I assumed that they used a lower quality driver. The resolution was going to be a little lower than I was expecting, but all that really worked out really quite well, and I think the driver is really, really quite good for $20. So technicals unexpectedly good, where I was expecting something a lot lower. Speed, separation, layering, imaging, all really work well in this nice balance of this slightly analytical but very likable presentation. And you do have to really consider that as well. It's not warm and cozy like a BL03. It's not kind of very warm and smooth over. It's slightly sharp, slightly analytical, but I would actually still say it's not quite as sharp as analytical as I've heard before. It's definitely halfway back towards the warm side. It's actually quite nice, and I think there's just they've refined the signature over so many years and so many sets that I think they've really nailed that level of giving you enough sharpness where details and articulations and all those things are kind of right on, but not nearly as warm as some other sets that you find in the same price range. And like I said, the stage definitely requires some power. If you power this with a dongle like my Hades S3 Pro, that was definitely way underpowered for this guy, and it sounded super boxy between the ears. That was really no good. So on a low power dongle, it would definitely sound boxy in between the ears, as I said. With an amp, the stage is bigger and more appropriate for the price, and it kind of sounds right on as too far as what I was expecting for the size of the stage, and it's quite well, especially for $20. And like everything else on this paper, done well, pretty much as it's going to happen at $20. It's very, very good. So again, that's about it. That's about 14 minutes longer than I thought it was going to take. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.